Alright, I have a confession to make. You know all that Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff? I eat it up. I watch all of it, and the shows too. I even watch Hawkeye. I even watch DC. You know, I see people complaining about too much Spider-Man these days. Nonsense. There's never enough Spider-Man. Truth is, I like the anti-hero stuff too, like The Boys and Invincible. But this game, Anyone Can Wear the Mask, belongs in the more mainstream heroes hero category of comic book story making RPGs. Anyone Can Wear the Mask is a 15-page RPG by Jeff Stormer. You may have heard of his podcast Party of One, in which he samples a huge variety of indie RPGs with GM and just one player. This game, like his podcast, is very sort of sentimental and full of heart. The game itself can be played solo, like a journaling RPG, which is how I played it, or it can be played with 2 or up to 3 players, which right there is pretty interesting. It's a 1 to 3 player RPG, which you don't see too many of. It's probably best explained as a 3-player game, and here's the concept. One person plays as the hero or superhero, depending on how powerful you want them to be. Another person plays the villain, who really just needs to be powerful enough to be a foil to the hero, but who will eventually be defeated. And the third person plays the city, the sort of representative of the populated urban environment where all of the story unfolds. You start this game with the person with the city role describing the city itself, which is the name of the city, the size and population is, and what are its 4 major areas or zones. Next, the hero describes their powers and the source of their powers. They will also determine their strong suit, which is literally one of 4 suits from a deck of cards, either clubs, spades, diamonds, or hearts. This will determine the dice pool on later card draws. Finally, the villain describes a list of threats numbered 2 to 10 corresponding to number cards, and will create an alter ego to hide amongst NPCs who are described in the story later on. So this game works with a deck of cards and a pool of D6s. You start with a full deck plus 1 joker mixed into the bottom half of your deck. Just in case you're wondering, the joker doesn't represent the Joker from Batman at all. It's more like a timer card that once you draw it, it triggers the penultimate major scene where the hero faces a huge defeat. But well before you get to that card, you will draw a number of other cards, and depending on that card's value, you will trigger one of 5 different kinds of scenes. 2 through 10 will trigger a somewhere in imminent danger scene, and naturally there will be a lot of these. In this case, the 3 players, in a specific order, go through a sequence of questions about what the hero faces and how they defeat the threat originating from the villain. This right here kind of tells you the feel of the game. The threat described can be pretty much anything, from a kitten stuck in a tree to a runaway train to a meteor about to obliterate Earth. But the commonality is that the 3 people at the table are working together to describe different aspects of the scene pretty much from scratch. That can be very exciting if you have imaginative players, but like any storytelling RPG, it's also a huge burden if you're not psyched up and in the mood for such a load. Anyway, drawing a jack leads to a somewhere peaceful scene where the hero basically cultivates an asset called an ally. Allies can be used to increase a roll result or to remove an opposing person power who's working against you. By the way, these assets are almost as narrative as you can get. There are dice rolls in some instances, but it's really light. Drawing a queen triggers a somewhere personal scene where the hero talks one-on-one with someone from their personal life and can heal one so-called injury, which would have a negative effect on their dice pool. Drawing a king triggers a somewhere protected scene where a person of power or enemy is created. These people act narratively as top lieutenants to the villain and will hinder the hero every time the dice are rolled for a threat to be stopped. Drawing an ace triggers a somewhere private scene, which is more like a sequence of maybe 2 scenes. One where the hero is told by a confidant about how to stop an enemy or person of power. Then in the second scene, the hero actually taking down this enemy, removing them from the roster. When you finally get to that Joker card, it triggers the downfall scene, in which the city, hero, and villain each in turn answer a series of questions that describe what the villain's identity really is, the something big that the villain wants, and how the hero fails to stop them. In scriptwriting terms, this is the end of the second act, when all hope is lost and it seems like there's no way for the hero to win. Just a quick note here about this Joker card. Since it's inserted randomly into the bottom half of your deck, you could conceivably get to it after about 26 card draws or as many as 51 card draws. This kind of happened to me on my solo playthrough, in which the Joker was the 4th from the bottom of the deck, which caused me to slog through dozens and dozens of cards before getting to the big scene. And to that, I say it's important in this game to enjoy the journey rather than gun for the end. Also, there's nothing stopping your table from just skipping to the downfall scene if you feel like your story is ripe for it. Actually, in the game, Jeff writes that after the downfall scene is done, players can either shuffle in the second Joker to eventually trigger the final uprising scene, or just skip right to the uprising scene if everyone wants to. In that final uprising scene, each of the 3 players describes how the villain is ultimately defeated and how the city is rallying behind the hero to make that happen. Alright, here are my thoughts on Anyone Can Wear the Mask. Random session lengths. Like I mentioned a minute ago, I think the randomized placement of the Joker cards that trigger the 2 final scenes really make for a wide open range of session lengths. Most scenes are going to be from the numbered cards and will trigger somewhere in imminent danger. These are the scenes where the hero faces off against a threat and dice are tallied and rolled. They require a lot of narration and creativity and thought, so there's a big difference between drawing 18 or drawing 36 of them before getting to the end of the session. But like I said, nothing is stopping the table from skipping to the end whenever needed. From the heart. A lot of questions prompt players to delve into deep emotional and psychological territory, especially for the hero. It's things like, what part of yourself scares you the most, and what weaknesses are you afraid that the villain will discover? The city also has to describe the collective fears and anxieties of the urban population, which makes any story a very human one. Novel division of labor. I think this game does some interesting stuff by dividing the narrative burden between 3 people. At first blush, you might think that the city player is really the GM, but that's not quite the right analogy. I guess you could say that the villain and the city split the GM responsibilities if looked through the lens of a traditional RPG, but generally speaking, it's pretty unique and fascinating. Now, I can't say that I've read too many comic books, but I have read hundreds of issues of The Amazing Spider-Man and continue to work my way up from 1963. I think right now I'm in the early 70s. And the one thing I can tell you about that reading experience is that it feels like Peter Parker's troubles never end. He never, ever seems to get a break. It's just one villain after another, and even when his girlfriend Gwen Stacy dies, the villains and the problems keep coming. And that is something that is very well created in this game. Due to the sort of long-form card deck structure of the game, you end up describing an endless string of superhero scenes where the villain and the hero are in a tango of destruction that plays out in a city that's biting its nails and hoping for some peace and quiet. So in that sense, this game is a monumental accomplishment in that it actually recreates the structure of a long-running comic book series. But since it doesn't come with exhaustive rollable tables of its own for threats and powers and villain types, etc., the people at the table playing the hero and the villain need to do extensive research before getting into a game. That means read a lot of comics. That's all I've got. I've included all the links down below where you can grab the game and check out Jeff's podcast, Party of One. Thanks for watching. See ya.